Welcome to the Supply Chain Pioneers podcast, where we highlight industry leaders on the forefront of innovation and technology in planning, procurement, and logistics. Hosted by your supply chain crow to know, Ulf Venn.
Supply Chain Pioneers, powered by Everstream Analytics. Everstream gives you the predictive insights and analytics to make your supply chain faster, smarter, safer, and lean. Go to everstream.ai to book your demo today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Supply Chain Pioneers. And today we have the Family and Friends edition, where we look into the new year with a lot of exciting guests that have a lot of exciting opinions on a lot of exciting topics. That was an intro. Anyway, with that, I want to welcome first Shehrina.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Ulf.
And then next, I want to welcome David.
Good to be here. Thanks, Ulf.
And last but not least, Jon.
Hello. How is everyone doing today?
And all of them have been on Supply Chain Pioneers in the past, had individual sessions, and have occurred on one or the other session already. So that's why it's a Family and Friends edition. Good. And we want to start just looking into the new year because it's fun and it's the start of the new year. It makes sense. So why don't we start with you, Shehrina? What do you think about Supply Chain 2025? What are some risks that might impact supply chains in the next year?
So, recording this on Monday, February the 3rd, and I think a lot of things have happened over the weekend. And so, new year, new risks. I'm sure everyone's thinking about the trade wars and the tariffs that have been slapped on over the weekend. And you have your typical risks that everyone should pay attention to, like the floods and the cyber attacks and insolvencies. But I think we're going to see a lot of attention on trade wars, especially after the announcements over the weekend. So that's going to be my pick for 2025 of trade wars and tariffs being one of the biggest risks.
Good. And what about you, David? Any other risks?
I'm gonna choose an easy one because I know I'm going to be right, and that is severe weather. But I would sort of caveat that by saying that, like any of the risks we're going to talk about today, the question isn't really what's the risk. The question is, when is it going to hit? Where is it going to hit? And with what severity, or perhaps better said, with what impact to my supply chain? And I'm sure we'll dig into that side of things a bit more as we go along.
Good. And you, Jon?
Yeah, I think tying some of these comments together, I think it'll be really interesting to see, first off, how logistics moving forward is impacted by both the trade wars and also some of the airline accidents and transport accidents that have occurred. And building on some of the ones that happened last year, it'll be interesting to see are people more, apparently there's a lot going on now with the airlines for obvious reasons being overly cautious, and how will that trickle through to the logistics side of things and thus the supply chain side of things. So it'll be interesting to see. That could have a long-term lag effect because of some of the big accidents that just happened.
Yeah. So one of the biggest risks that I see for supply chains in 2025 is that they get overlooked and neglected. We saw that during COVID and the risks that were rising back then, right? Supply chains were able to get a seat at the table and were really talking to the big guys in the company and got a lot of investments, fundings, and so on and so forth. But then, honestly, I think in a lot of companies, not all, but in a lot of companies, the hype waned again. Supply chains were put aside a little bit again. So now my question would be, and we start with you, David, will supply chains, given that obviously 2025 seems to build up as a risk year, will supply chains be able to regain the seat at the table, and how can they keep them this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, 2025 is the year of fighting generalizations. So I'm going to give an example of what I mean by that, where it really depends on the company. It depends on the company culture, and it depends specifically on the way in which the supply chain team is managing, is using KPIs, and is communicating with and using the language of the chief financial officer. Because the cash to order or whatever it is needs to be translated into revenue, profit, P&L, working capital, cash flow, in order for that seat at the table not just to be gained, but to be held. And I'll take it a step slightly deeper and bring it back to talking about risk, because I think one of the biggest gaps in that flow of information to the CFO and the CEO is where people talk about risk, but without being specific about what they're talking about, what the impact is, how that impacts supply chain KPIs, and therefore how that impacts the P&L of a company.
That's great. Jon, anything to add?
Yeah, one of the things that I always look at any point in time throughout the year, I think now's a good time to reflect, is what's sort of the demand supply curve in different industries that we work a lot with, and are companies more fixated on revenue, is thus the demand side of the curve, or in the supply side of the curve? In the past, we've seen the supply has been the problem. Now, I think you can look at it from either side, so around the supply chain role and impact to the company. But I think it appears to me that growth is in order, and that demand is going to be the order of the day, impacting the supply chain to deliver, to get the supplies they need, to get those shipments to the customers. And I do think that's going to be a big push this year. So it's all about revenue. I think in most years it is, but I think this year more so than ever, I think companies have been holding back. And I think in 2025, I think it's going to be a big push for revenue this year at the cost of other things.
Yeah, and to build on what Jon said, with revenue comes the concept of cost pressure. And I think risks, as you see building and escalating, and especially on topics like trade wars and terrorists, they intend to have a cost pressure on the supply chain. And so as soon as those topics come up, it becomes a boardroom topic. And will supply chain gain a seat at the table? Absolutely, because without well-functioning supply chains, nothing works, and therefore it becomes a big topic as well this year. Yeah, I do feel like it takes a really big shock to move everyone out of being complacent, and maybe we've gotten a little bit accepting of risks over the last few years, but I think everything we'll see this year will jolt everyone back into action and take this very seriously.
Yeah. So the summary is essentially, if they want to regain the seat at the table, supply chains have to deliver on risk in 2025. Is that kind of the summary?
I think supply chains always need to deliver. I think there's just going to be a lot more attention on it.
David, my pun not even accepted with a slight smile. I'm a little bit disappointed, actually. But anyway, Shehrina, we stay with you because I think that's one of your favorite topics. How is the role of AI in supply chain going to transform supply chains in 2025, right? Everybody's talking about AI. What does it really mean for supply chains?
Yeah, I think transformation is a really big word. I'd like to see AI as more of an enabler. And I think we're going to be able to see a lot of improvements and efficiency gains as a result of using technologies like AI in different ways. For example, Everstream is dabbling with data cleansing efforts, with risk recommendation efforts, with using AI. And it doesn't remove the need for a lot of the things that have already happened or the things that are core to supply chains, but it makes it a little bit more efficient. It's not going to be so incremental that I hesitate to call it transformation, but I think an enabler is more how I like to see it.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think transformational is probably overselling what is going to happen. It doesn't oversell the capabilities and potential of AI and supply chain, but it oversells what is going to happen in the near term. And it's not the technology that's the bottleneck here. It's the processes that are embedded in supply chains, and particularly the processes around data. So the companies last year that made the most progress around AI use cases were those who have been spending years getting their data in the right place and in the right order, and almost most importantly, to a point where they can start trusting their data. Because if you can't trust the data, you can't trust the output from the AI. And sure, AI can help with data cleanliness, but that's a journey. I'm excited about some of the more narrow use cases, particularly around agentic AI, which way too much buzz around that at the moment, but there are some things that you can automate in supply chains, you should, as long as you make sure that there's not a bottleneck upstream and downstream of whatever it is that you're speeding up and automating. As Shehrina says, companies like Everstream have been using AI for years. A huge amount of the progress has been around things like machine learning. I'm pretty excited by some of the things I've seen coming out of Everstream around some of the newer forms around large language models. But it's going to be slow, steady progress. And the ones who will win are the companies who've got their arms around their data.
Jon, you work also with a lot of other companies and platform partners, right? So you have a good view also on the landscape overall. What do you think about AI and supply chain?
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. I reflect on, as David and Shehrina mentioned, on some of the advances that we've made and seen, and then in some of the partners around AI and the ability to take lots of complex data and create some insights instantaneously is just amazing. And also on the process automation. So if I take that a bit further, I'm seeing a lot of when we work with other partners and data partners doing the same. So I think you're seeing, including the consulting companies, I think they're seeing potentially a lot of work really shift. And so the consulting and implementation business is going to shift substantially. The idea of what makes up a knowledge worker is going to shift substantially, and I think it's going to play out in a big way this year. Where that goes and what's the ripple effect? I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I think back to, it used to be a big job at a company, the switchboard operator. That's how you got to a lot of people at a company. They don't exist anymore. And I think we're going to start to see that because of AI, roles are going to shift yet again, and we'll see how all that plays out. But I think this year is a big year for that and the automation and how data and insights change, both with vendors or at companies. It's going to be a very interesting year, I think, for that.
And I can't let this topic go without mentioning what happened last week. I spent the whole weekend nerding out over this DeepSeek situation, and I think it's going to be it's too early to tell how this is going to play out, but I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on, and how something like this seismic shift will make it easier for people to access AI, and who wins will be the ones with the best data. The models may not necessarily be most proprietary thing anymore, because if you make it open source, then of course more people have access to that kind of knowledge. But to David's point, the one with the better data, more clean data, will probably be able to leverage this development. So very excited to see how this is going to play out in the coming weeks and months.
If Shehrina gets to add on, then I get to add on. My message is to the startups and the companies that are either investing in startups or looking at using those startups, and it comes back to data, it comes back to trust. And as an investor, I'll be at Manifest next week, and I'll be meeting a ton of startups. And the thing I'll be listening for isn't that they use AI. I'll be interested in how they're using AI. My question will be, what else do you have? What is your industry knowledge, expertise, connectivity, product market fit? All of the things that traditional businesses have always been looked at, that doesn't change. And AI is an enabler. It is really not a competitive advantage. It's a competitive disadvantage if you're not using it. But for companies who are looking at working with startups, think about the questions that investors ask, and think about how you can put those in the context as you, a user.
Also, I talked to a data scientist recently who said, if you, as a solution provider, don't embrace AI soon, eventually somebody will be able to take your expertise and just make it cheaper, right? So I think it's also a cost pressure very soon if you are not able to leverage AI quite efficiently.
Oh, and one more tip that anyone who wants a quiet weekend, if you start a sentence with, I was just talking to a data scientist and they told me, my family leaves the room almost immediately, which is great. I get a very nice quiet weekend.
I was talking to an economist and everyone leaves.
This is why you need a friends and family podcast.
No offense to
where you can nerd out
economists.
together.
Exactly. This is exactly the reason. Nobody in my family would understand a thing.
But yeah, I would start by saying, But did you understand what they said, Dad?
Yeah, probably actually. So let's shift topic. Maybe it's in line as well. So with AI come a lot of questions around sustainability and compliance, which then now makes a bridge to the last couple of years. We're big on compliance and supply chains as well, right? Because there were so many new laws coming. Now, all these new laws are getting reorganized, reformed, smaller in scope, and even much smaller in scope. Some were abandoned already. The question is compliance still a thing in 2025? And what laws are here to stay? Maybe we just start with you, John.
Yeah, I think all of it pretty passionate subject for me. I think the compliance side of things, and it's interesting that again, yeah, I think in terms of how the pendulum swings back and forth and risk, compliance, other topics that we address, but we're definitely at an upswing on the compliance regulation, and I think what's driving that is these trends and shifts around globalization and how countries are dealing with each other, even going back to demand supply. And the U.S. is trying to pull more manufacturing back. Will they be able to? Who knows? But it's driving a lot of regulation. If you look at the EU is driving a lot as well, a lot of regulation and thus compliance. But I think it all comes back to know your supplier, know your business to protect your brand, period. So I think these compliance rules and regulations are going to shift over time. We've seen it shift, and some get adopted, some with less teeth, as we like to say. But I do think that it is still going to be a really critical area, particularly around companies not wanting to risk, obviously, lawsuits and fines, but even the brand. I still think it's a lot of companies are really driven by brand. And if you go back to my earlier comment on revenue, it's the year of revenue. So we still need to be very careful around some of these. So I think compliance and regulation is going to drive a lot of behavior in supply chains this year.
What about you, Shehrina?
So first of all, I want to preface this with the fact that I think compliance in supply chains is extremely important. However, I think with the cost pressures we're going to be seeing from tariffs this year, I almost anticipate that there will be additional pressure and advocacy with regulators to either push, postpone, or rethink some of these supply chain regulations. I wholeheartedly believe these are necessary to ensure that we have resilient and sustainable supply chains free of forced labor. But at the same time, I think we're going to have a lot of attention on things like tariffs, which will necessitate that we rethink what the timing for these compliance regulations should be and what companies can realistically deal with within the year. So I'm curious to see how this will play out.
Yeah. David, anything to add?
So I think the thing that I would hit on here is the intersection of compliance and operational risk. And I'll start by saying that internally, the discussion needs to be between supply chain and compliance, or treasury, or enterprise risk, or whoever is looking internally at risk from a compliance standpoint, and having a conversation about what does this mean for supply chain and what should we be doing as an enterprise, because otherwise you'll head down a path of checking boxes, one regulation at a time, and you'll miss what is actually an opportunity in and around supply chain operations to do something that is transformational. As Shehrina says, regulations, they'll come and go. They will be enforced. They won't be enforced. There's a lot of variation. There's a lot of uncertainty about what actually in a year's time will matter. The one thing that will not change is that you need to know not only how you are as a company, as a compliant, but you also need to know who your suppliers are, where they are, what is the nexus between them and the varying regulations, but also going upstream from your suppliers. So rather than reacting to a new regulation and being told by treasury or enterprise risk what you need to do as supply chain, stop and say the first thing we need to do, because it applies to every regulation, is we need to know nexus. We need to know nexus based on where, what, and who. Where are the warehouses or the ports or the factories? Who am I dealing with? What is the company? Who owns them? And what is the material? And therefore, what are the regulations that I need to be worried about? And you can only do that if you've mapped your supply chain. And when I say map, don't think, oh, map. Yeah, kids draw maps. It's the opposite of that. It's the most complicated and difficult thing to do because you need to know that this lat long is correct. You need to know that company ABC is the same as company ABC1. And entity resolution is at the center of that. And big data and AI is at the center of entity resolution. So if someone says they can map your supply chain because you tell them where things are, stop and rethink that. It's not true. Supply chain mapping is at the core of compliance, and it is at the center of operational risk management for supply chain. Don't let the tail wag the dog.
Here, I also want to say something. I feel personally that the whole compliance topic was unfortunately detrimental to the sustainability movement that already was going on. And now people, especially leadership, is more annoyed by all these changes that they miss is what you said, right? The fundamentals that you need anyway for operational risk management can be adopted to help your supply chain get more sustainable, which can be a brand advantage in the market if you're able to do that. There are a lot of brands in fashion that are doing this. They are not getting the attention that I would like, but there are some who are really very deep in building sustainable clothing. And yeah, we need more of that, I think, in general. We'll hopefully see that again, but I felt the compliance topic has taken away from that personally, which is sad.
I think just build on that, Ulf. It comes back to the seat at the table question you asked earlier on. Supply chain must have a seat at the table when companies are discussing compliance, because compliance or non-compliance, particularly by a supplier, is operational risk. If that supplier is shut down, that is the same as the factory burning down. It is operational risk. And the importance of supply chain to this and the importance of that to the reputation and, as Jon said earlier, the ability to generate revenue should be top of the list. And if supply chain isn't at the table talking in detail about the challenges and opportunities of accurate mapping of supply chains, it's a huge missed opportunity for the company. And sustainability should be driving operational improvement, not seen as some kind of inconvenience.
I think just
Can't
building
agree
on
more.
that, I think the trend that we've seen coming out of last year, and we'll see if it continues this year, is organizationally, a lot of the people that we've been working with that started out on the procurement or sourcing side or on the supply chain side, logistics, sustainability, trade compliance, all these things are merging, right? So we're seeing the same leader, all of these functions start to merge under the same leader, whether we work with them previously or not. And I'm seeing that trend, and that'll be an interesting trend to follow this in 2025, because it would indicate that compliance, supply chain, sustainability, Ulf, back to your point, all these things are merging, right? Companies are seeing the value of pulling them under one organization to manage them. And I think logistics has been part of that, but it'll be interesting to see how logistics, is it pulled under that same umbrella and organization? Is it still kept separate in a lot of cases? So it'll be very interesting to see how all these organizations start to shake out. That also is indicative of trends going on in the industry too.
I apologize for jumping in again, Ulf, but Jon has just hit on one of my 2025 themes. There is a very big difference between supply chain risk management and supplier risk management. Supplier risk management is so important. Do not underestimate that, but it's different from supply chain risk management. Supply chain risk management takes into account every function as you think about sourcing, making, and delivering, and logistics networks, yours and other people's, is a critical part of that. So if someone says supply chain risk management and they're not considering logistics risk, then they're not talking about supply chain risk management.
Going to build on all of what you just said, because it's about things are merging together, new technologies are emerging. So, and we start with you, David, because you're going to manifest very soon. You're going to look at a lot of technology again, and you are on a lot of conferences. So what are some of the interesting technologies that you have seen emerge for supply chain management and supply chain risk management that we should have an eye towards?
Yeah, it's a great question. And touching on what I said earlier in terms of the progression of AI, when we think about emerging technology, it's really not the technology, I think, that I'm excited about, or at least looking at, because the technology's there. It's been there for months, years in some cases. Take robotics, for example. Take DC microgrids. Take AI. Take blockchain. Don't take blockchain. But there's a long list of technologies that I think are really are brilliant. What's interesting is where and how companies are actually able to leverage these. Robotics is a great example because there are certain parts of a supply chain where robotic automation gives you an immediate lift. So in warehouses, person to goods to person, that type of, you're accelerating around what has been a bottleneck in warehouses. Automating and creating a bottleneck upstream or downstream doesn't really help you as long as you've got a plan to deal with it. But I think that the really interesting thing for me and what I'll be listening for and looking for at Manifest is how are people actually using the technology? So I tend to spend more time with chief supply chain officers than I do tech leaders because I can read their website and I'll get told the same thing at the booth. I can ask questions, but you don't always get the answer you really want when you say, can you explain in more detail how your company leverages AI? I often get a bit of a sort of, oh, I'll have to, let me check with someone. So to me, it's about the people and the processes as much as it is about the new technology. What are people actually using and having success with?
Yeah. Shehrina, also important topic for you, I believe.
Yeah, staying on the theme that we talked about earlier, I'm very keen to see how large language models and Gen AI will support supply chain risk management. And David's absolutely right. Supply chain risk management goes far beyond just supplier risk management. And so how some of these Gen AI concepts will be able to make improvements on collaboration, on cross-functional collaboration when it comes to risks, being able to set foundational data to be able to do supply chain risk management, and then go into more compliance type of topics like how do you screen suppliers faster, how do you understand any non-compliance within the supply chain. So all of these things I'm very excited about, and I think we're going to see some cool things coming out this year, but those are things that are very exciting for me.
And Jon, Mr. Market Scan.
I don't know that I have much more to add, but it will definitely be an interesting 2025 on some of these key themes that we've talked about. We should definitely get back together later on in the year and see how things have changed and evolved. That would be fun.
That is actually a good idea.
That's a
See,
great
you had
idea.
something really important to add. New episode for me is always good. I don't have to look for somebody.
Exactly. Yeah, the check's in the mail. All right, got it.
Perfect. Cool. We have talked a lot about risks and what might happen, and all of that was a little bit, in part, negatively connotated, but there's definitely also something positive to look forward to. And Jon, you're also Mr. Optimistic, so maybe we start with you on what are you looking forward to in 2025 from a professional perspective?
Yeah, already started seeing some of this kind of, call it performance gains, the ability to do work, how AI is able to really help, whether it's myself personally or our product team or our delivery team or customers, talking to customers. I think we're going to start seeing AI and how that optimizes processes and performance and just makes work shift really the workload of, I can literally generate a presentation in seconds where it would take me hours, days, and then consultants, they'd charge you $200,000. So I think that's going to be really interesting how that impacts this year. And I'm very interested in that. And the future of work is always really fascinating. And I think this is a pivotal year for that. So I'm looking forward to that. So next time we get back together, we can see if we have any updates on that.
Perfect. And Shehrina, what about you?
I'll take the complete opposite of what Jon said. Whether you consider this professional or personal perspective, I am actually looking forward to common sense prevailing this year. I think we all recognize that we're better off if we're not protectionist, if we all collectively work together a common goal. And so I'm inherently an optimist like John. And so I'm hoping common sense will prevail this year.
That would be great. David, what about you?
I think on a professional note, but John went first because he's the optimist. I don't know what that makes me, but I'm going to go straight past that and comment about
The super optimist.
2025.
I want to end on a high note, okay?
So, yeah. So my positive view of professional world of supply chains in 2025 is it's the year where it becomes apparent to chief supply chain officers that supply chain risk management and supplier risk management are two different things, or at least one is a subset of the other, and that companies will start to talk about supply chain risk in a very precise way to understand how risk actually impacts their operations, impacts supply chain KPIs, and therefore not only do supply chain managers have a seat at the table, but supply chain risk managers have a seat at the table. In fact, maybe we stop calling them supply chain risk managers. Supply chain risk management is supply chain management. They are sides of the same coin, if you want to call it that. But I'll finish by just building on what Shehrina said. I think one theme I've heard from so many people personally and professionally this year is this is a crazy, uncertain world, and I don't know what I can do. It feels like everything is out of my control. And I'll just say one thing. There is one thing that is in your control, and that is whenever you interact with people, start by thinking, where are they coming from? Walk a mile in their shoes. And by doing that, you'll be a little bit kinder to everyone you meet every day. And if everyone does that, that changes the world.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'll just add 2 or 3 things that I'm looking forward to in this year. First, I do believe that while maybe the word anti-fragility is not as prevalent right now when it comes to supply chain risk management, the idea of being faster than others in reacting and creating a competitive advantage by securing the last stuff is something that I believe is important to supply chains. And I do believe we will see more of that because we see a lot of people having invested in different things, technologies, but also people now having the ability to do that. And the question will now become who's most efficient. I think this race will be interesting. Second, I'm looking forward to recording more podcasts personally because I always learn so much on these podcasts. So I'm very keen on continuing that, and it's going to continue. I'm not going to stop. And third, I'm going to look forward to not record at 2:00 in the day because I have all of a sudden the slide here and it's really annoying and I can't see anything the whole time. It's super distracting. So next time I'm not going to record at 2:00.
We'll see some tape over that line next time we do it. Yeah, that's right.
Good. Guys, thank you so much. This was great. We talked a lot about risks, but in the end, I think everybody's looking forward to 2025 and let's have some fun.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Ulf.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
And for everybody who's listening, watching, or however you enjoy this podcast, we want to say bye-bye.
This was Supply Chain Pioneers. Thanks for watching, listening, or however you are enjoying this podcast. You can find Supply Chain Pioneers on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all other major podcast players, as well as on YouTube at Ulf Talks Supply Chain. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you next time.